He owes us, Mom. He owes you everything. Maya hissed, rage building. Catherine just trembled, clutching her threadbare blanket. No, child, you don't understand. Understand what? That a billionaire, living large, got a free pass while she coughed her lungs out. Bills piling like snowdrifts. A sudden rap at the door. 2 suits. Mr. Beaumont requests your presence. Right, like she had a choice. They think they're so powerful. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. This ain't charity, it's payback, sugar. Ice and survival until one Tuesday afternoon. A man walked in. A man whose suit cost more than her car, whose watch could have paid off her mother's medical bills for a year. But it wasn't his wealth that made her drop a plate. It was the scar on his hand, a jagged star-shaped mark she had traced in her dreams. A phantom from her mother's whispered, feverish bedtime stories. What if a simple scar wasn't just a mark, but a map? A map leading back to a buried secret, a forgotten promise, and a truth that could shatter a billion-dollar empire and rewrite a lifetime of lies. The bell above the door of the Corner Perk diner chimed a tiny, cheerful sound that was completely at odds with the man who had just entered. He didn't so much walk in as he did arrive, bringing with him an aura of silent, crushing power that sucked the air out of the room. The usual lunchtime chatter of construction workers and office clerks faltered. Every head turned. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that looked like it was spun from shadow and money. His dark hair was lightly touched with silver at the temples, and his face was a mask of cold, handsome indifference. This was not a man who ate at places like the Corner Perk. Maya Peterson, balancing 3 plates on her arm, felt the shift in atmosphere instantly. She shot a look at her boss, a perpetually stressed man named Saul, who was already wiping down the only empty booth number 4 with a frantic energy. Maya, you take this one, S hissed, his eyes wide. Look sharp, don't mess it up. Maya nodded, her professional smile clicking into place as she navigated the cramped space. She was 24, though the constant worry and 16-hour days often made her feel twice that. Her life was a carefully balanced equation of rent, utilities, and the ever-growing mountain of her mother's medical expenses. There was no room for error, no space for a messed-up order from a man who looked like he could buy the entire city block on a whim. Welcome to the Corner Perk, she said, her voice, even as she placed a menu and a glass of water on the table. Can I start you off with something to drink? Coffee's fresh? The man didn't even look at the menu. His gaze was fixed on something outside the grimy window, his expression unreadable. Black coffee, no sugar. His voice was deep, a low baritone that seemed to vibrate in the cheap vinyl of the booth. Coming right up, Maya said, turning away. As she poured the coffee, she could feel his presence like a pressure change. The other customers were starting to whisper. She recognized him from the business magazines her mother sometimes read. Adrian Beaumont, the CEO of Beaumont Industries, a global conglomerate with its fingers in everything from tech to real estate. He was a titan, a modern-day king. What in God's name was he doing in a greasy spoon diner in this part of town? She returned with the coffee and set the thick white mug down on the table. It was then, as he reached for it, that she saw it. His hand. It was a large, powerful hand with clean manicured nails, but on the back of it, stretching from the knuckle of his index finger towards his wrist, was a scar. It wasn't a clean surgical line. It was a chaotic, jagged starburst of pale, puckered flesh against his tanned skin. Time seemed to stop. The clatter of the diner faded into a dull roar in her ears. The boat manned the engine, a terrible noise, and then stars right there on his hand. I made the stars go away, baby. I pushed him away from the fire. The words were her mother's, spoken in a haze of pain medication and fragmented memory ghosts of a story Maya had never fully understood. For years, she'd thought they were just that delirious ramblings, a fairy tale cooked up by a mind clouded with illness. Her mother, Catherine, had a degenerative neurological condition that was slowly stealing her memories, her mobility, her very self. The stories were often disjointed about a big house by a lake, a little boy named Addie, and a promise she had to keep. And always the scar, the star-shaped scar. Maya stared. Her breath caught in her throat. The scar on Adrienne Beaumont's hand was identical to the one from her mother's fractured bedtime stories. The shape, the placement, the texture, she could imagine just by looking at it. It was real. Her hand trembled, and a single drop of hot coffee sloshed from the mug onto the table. Beaumont's gaze snapped from the window to the spill, then up to her face. His eyes were a startling shade of gray, cold and analytical. He saw her staring at his hand, and his expression hardened almost imperceptibly. He subtly shifted, tucking his hand partially under the sleeve of his suit jacket. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone sharp, cutting through her shock. Maya felt a hot flush of embarrassment. No, sir. I'm sorry." She fumbled for a napkin, her mind racing a million miles a minute. Was it possible? Could this billionaire, this untouchable man, be the little boy from her mother's past? The boy she claimed to have saved? I'll be right back to take your order," she stammered, backing away from the table like a frightened animal. She fled to the relative safety of the kitchen, leaning against the stainless steel counter, her heart hammering against her ribs. The cook, a burly man named Gus, gave her a questioning look. "You okay, kid? You look like you've seen a ghost." A ghost? Yes, that's what it felt like. A ghost from a life her mother had never spoken of in the light of day. A life that existed only in whispers and shadows. The stories had always been a source of painful fantasy for Maya, a glimpse into a world where her mother was strong and heroic, not frail and fading. But seeing that scar had changed everything. It wasn't a fantasy, it was a memory that belonged to her mother and a secret that Adrienne Beaumont carried on his own skin. She looked through the service window. Adrienne Beaumont sat alone in his booth, a solitary island of wealth and power, stirring his coffee with a detached rhythmic motion. He seemed completely out of place, yet utterly certain of his position in the world. A fierce, protective anger began to bubble up inside Maya, eclipsing her shock. Her mother was dying. They were drowning in debt, fighting for every scrap of dignity. While this man, a man her mother had saved, if the stories were true, sat there without a care in the world. Did he even remember her? Did he know what had become of the girl who gave him that scar while saving his life? S poked his head into the kitchen. "What are you doing?" "He's waiting. Go take his order." Taking a deep breath, Maya smoothed down her apron. Her mind was made up. This was more than a coincidence. It was a chance. A 1 in a billion shot. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a daughter on the verge of uncovering a truth that had been buried for over 30 years. She had to know for her mother's sake. She walked back out to booth 4, her steps deliberate, her resolve hardening with each one. The professional smile was gone, replaced by a look of quiet, intense determination. Adrienne Beaumont looked up, a flicker of annoyance in his gray eyes. "Have you decided?" she asked, her voice steady, though her pulse was a frantic drum against her ears. "Just a cheeseburger," he said dismissively, as if the choice were an inconvenience. "A cheeseburger," she repeated, scribbling it on her notepad. Then she looked up, meeting his cold gaze directly. "It's a funny thing, Memory, don't you think?" His eyebrows knitted together in a frown. "I have no idea what you're talking about. That scar on your hand?" Maya pressed on her voice, dropping to a near whisper. "My mother used to tell me stories about it, about a boat engine, a fire, and a little boy named Addie." The silver spoon in Adrienne Beaumont's hand stopped stirring. The quiet clinking against the ceramic ceased. The silence that followed was deafening. He slowly lifted his head, and for the first time since he had walked in the mask of cold indifference cracked. In its place was a look of utter, profound disbelief. The air in booth 4 thickened, becoming heavy and charged. Adrienne Beaumont's face, moments before a study in board authority, was now a canvas of conflicting emotions. Shock was the most prominent, but underneath it lay a deep, shuddered suspicion. He slowly placed the spoon on the table, the clink echoing in the sudden silence of Mir's world. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. It wasn't a casual question, it was an interrogation. "My name is Maya Peterson," she said, her own voice, barely a whisper, yet it felt like a shout. "My mother is Catherine Peterson." He stared at her, his gray eyes searching her face as if trying to decipher a complex code. The name Catherine Peterson drew a blank. His expression tightened, the disbelief hardening back into a shield of cold skepticism. I don't know anyone by that name, but you were called Addie, weren't you? Maya pressed her desperation, making her bold. And you were on a boat on Lake Antro. It was the summer you turned 10. Every detail she spoke was a blow visibly landing on him. The mention of Lake Antero, of the nickname he hadn't heard in decades, made his jaw clench. He had built an empire on controlling information, on knowing everything about everyone he dealt with. To have this waitress, this girl with tired eyes and a cheap apron, recite the details of his most traumatic childhood memory was deeply unnerving. He saw her not as a person, but as a threat, a grifter. Someone who had somehow dug up a piece of his sealed past and was now trying to leverage it. I think you've made a mistake, he said, his tone glacial. He reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a slim black wallet, and tossed several hundred bills onto the table. It was more than enough to cover 100 cheeseburgers. It was a dismissal for your trouble. He stood up his tall frame, casting a long shadow over her. He was about to walk away to leave her standing there, with her heart in her throat and his money on the table. She saved your life, Maya said, the words tumbling out raw and accusatory. The shrapnel from the engine would have hit you. She pushed you out of the way. It cut her arm too, but she always worried about you, about the boy with the star on his hand. Adrian froze his back to her. For a long moment he didn't move. Then without turning around he spoke. Whoever your source is, they're very good. But you all mistaken. He walked away without another word, a man retreating behind fortress walls. The bell above the door chimed his exit, and he was gone, leaving behind a stunned diner and a small pile of money that felt like an insult. Maya stood trembling, the cash on the table, a testament to the chasm between their worlds. He hadn't denied it, not really. He had deflected, dismissed, and paid her off, but he hadn't said she was wrong. That evening, the smell of antiseptic and boiled vegetables filled their small two-bedroom apartment. Maya found her mother, Catherine, sitting in her worn armchair by the window, a faded quilt over her lap. Her hair, once a vibrant orange, was now thin and white. Her hands, twisted with the progression of her illness, lay still. Mama, Maya said softly, kneeling beside the chair. Catherine's eyes, cloudy with age and confusion, slowly focused on her daughter. Maya, baby, you're home. I'm home, Mama. Maya took her mother's frail hand. I need to ask you something. It's important. She recounted the events of the afternoon, her voice low and urgent, describing the man, his suit, his cold eyes, and finally the scar. As she spoke, a change came over Catherine. The fog in her eyes sharpened into a bright, lucid terror. Her hand, which had been limp in mirrors, tightened with surprising strength. No, Catherine whispered, her voice raspy. You must not. You must never speak to him again. Do you understand me, Maya? But Mama, he's the one. He's Addie. He's a billionaire now. He could help us. He could help you. Help! Catherine's laugh was a dry, rattling sound. They don't help, Maya. People like that. They erase, they remove problems. Her breathing grew shallow, her eyes darting around the room as if seeing ghosts in the corners. I made a promise a long time ago. I promised to disappear. I promised to never speak of it. For your safety, for mine? What promise? Who did you promise? Maya pleaded, her frustration mounting. Mama, we're barely surviving. Your medicine costs a fortune. I'm working 2 jobs. Don't you think he owes you something? He owes you his life. He owes me nothing, Catherine snapped, a flash of her old fiery spirit returning. It was the most animated Maya had seen her in months. I took the money. I signed the papers. The deal was done. You will leave it alone, Maya. You will not stir the waters. Promise me. Her eyes bored into mirrors, filled with a primal fear that chilled Mia to the bone. This wasn't just about a forgotten past. This was about a deep, abiding terror that had shaped her mother's entire life. A terror she had passed down in the form of secrecy and silence. Promise me, Catherine repeated, her voice cracking. Tears welled in Mayer's eyes. How could she promise to abandon this one ray of hope? But looking at her mother so fragile and so utterly terrified, She couldn't bring herself to cause her more pain. "Okay, Mama," she lied, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I promise I'll leave it alone." Catherine sagged back into the chair, the brief burst of energy draining away, leaving her looking smaller and more vulnerable than ever. She closed her eyes, murmuring, "Good girl. It's better this way. Safer." Later that night, long after her mother had drifted into a restless sleep, Maya sat at the small kitchen table. The $100 bills from Adrian Beaumont spread out before her. They weren't a dismissal. They were a clue. He had overreacted. His denial was too swift, his payment too large. It was hush money. Her mother's fear hadn't deterred her. It had galvanized her. What kind of promise? What kind of deal could instill such terror for over 30 years? What had they done to her mother? They hadn't just paid her off. They had silenced her. They had erased her. Maya carefully folded the bills and tucked them into an envelope labeled evidence. Her promise to her mother was a necessary lie, a shield to protect her from worry. But her promise to herself was ironclad. She was no longer just trying to understand a few fragmented stories. She was going to uncover the truth of what happened at Lake Ontario and reclaim the life that had been stolen from her mother. The door Adrian Beaumont had slammed in her face wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. She just had to find the key. Adrian Beaumont sat in his penthouse office, a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking the sprawling city lights. The view which usually calmed him offered no solace tonight. On his vast obsidian desk lay a single file, its stark manila color, an unwelcome intrusion into his monochrome world of black, white, and gray. The file was on Maya Peterson. He hadn't been able to shake the encounter at the diner. The girl's words echoed in his mind. Lake Ontario. Addie, the star on your hand. It was a calculated attack on the most fortified part of his memory. After leaving the diner, his first call had been to Robert Finch, the head of his personal security and legal team for over 20 years. Finch was a quiet, meticulous man whose loyalty was absolute and whose methods were ruthlessly efficient. Find out everything there is to know about a waitress named Maya Peterson at a place called the Corner Perk. Adrian had commanded his voice tight, and her mother, Catherine. Now Finch stood silently on the other side of the desk as Adrian read the preliminary report. It was a bleak, unremarkable story. Maya Peterson, 24, honor student in high school, dropped out of community college to care for her ailing mother. Juggled 2, sometimes 3, waitressing jobs. No criminal record, no debts other than the catastrophic medical ones. Catherine Peterson, 56, diagnosed 5 years ago with corticobasal degeneration, a rare and aggressive neurological disease. Formerly a librarian's assistant, lived a quiet, almost invisible life. "It's a dead end," Sir Finch said, his voice neutral. "The records for Catherine Peterson only go back 32 years. Before that, it's as if she didn't exist. No birth certificate under that name, no school records." "She changed her name," Adrian stated, more to himself than to Finch. He tapped a finger on the file. "This doesn't feel like a simple scam. A professional grifter would have a more polished story, a more direct demand. This was personal." Perhaps Finch conceded, but the details of the Lake Antro incident were sealed tightly. Only a handful of people knew the exact nature of the accident. Your father made sure of that. The mention of his father, Walter Beaumont, brought a familiar chill to the room. Walter was the architect of the Beaumont Empire and of Adrian's tightly controlled upbringing. He was a man who treated life as a series of transactions and liabilities to be managed. "My father told me the girl and her family were groundskeepers." Adrian recalled staring out at the city. He said they were compensated generously and moved away to start a new life. He said they were happy to go. That was the official narrative, Finch confirmed. "Find the original settlement. Find the name of the family we paid off 34 years ago," Adrian ordered. "I want to know who Catherine Peterson used to be." Finch nodded. "It will be in the old family archives locked away. It may take some time." "Get it done," Adrian said, dismissing him. Alone again, Adrian leaned back in his chair and looked at his right hand. He flexed his fingers, the star-shaped scar pulling at the skin. For decades, it had been a reminder of his own mortality, of a fleeting moment of chaos in an otherwise meticulously ordered life. He remembered the searing heat, the smell of gasoline on the water, the terrifying splintering of wood. And he remembered a girl with fiery auburn hair and bright laughing eyes. Her name was Katie. She was the daughter of one of the estate staff, and for one magical summer, she had been his only friend. He remembered her pulling him from the wreckage of the exploding boat, her small hands surprisingly strong. He remembered her crying not for herself, but for him as the adults swarmed around them. And then nothing. He'd been whisked away, and when he returned from the hospital, she was gone. His father's explanation had been simple and final. They had been taken care of. End of story. But now this waitress had pried open that sealed chapter, and Adrian was beginning to suspect that his father's version of the story was a carefully constructed fiction. Meanwhile, in her cramped apartment, Maya was on her own investigation. After her mother was asleep, Maya would pull out the old battered shoebox from the back of the hall closet. It was Catherine's only concession to the past, a collection of meaningless trinkets she could never bring herself to throw away. Or so Maya had thought. Tonight she looked at the contents with new eyes. A dried-out core, a ticket stub from a movie dated 1989, a handful of faded dog-eared photographs. Most were of a baby Mare, but a few were older. In one, a much younger, vibrant Catherine stood laughing with another woman. On the back, written in faded ink, was a caption, "Me and Deb Summer, 91. There was another photo of this one causing Maya's heart to stop. It showed a large, beautiful house by a lake, the kind of place you only see in magazines. It was taken from a distance, but it was unmistakable. In the foreground, slightly out of focus, was the back of a young girl with bright hair, the same color her mother's had been. Maya's hands trembled as she dug deeper. At the very bottom of the box, beneath a bundle of old letters tied with a ribbon, she found a small velvet pouch. Inside was a heavy silver locket, tarnished with age. It was a heart-shaped locket. She struggled with the clasp for a moment before it popped open. On one side was a tiny, professionally cut picture of her mother as a young woman no older than 20. She was beautiful, her smile radiant and full of life. But it was the other side that made Maya gasp. It was a picture of a young boy around 10 years old with serious gray eyes and a familiar, unsmiling mouth. It was Adrian Beaumont. The proof was cold and heavy in her hand. This wasn't a delusion. This was real. Her mother had known him. She had cared enough to keep his picture in a locket for over 30 years. The bundle of letters was next. They weren't addressed to Catherine Peterson. The name on the envelopes was Catherine Connolly. The return address on most of them was from a Deborah Alley in Chicago. This had to be the Deb from the photograph. Her mother had another name, a whole other identity. Catherine Peterson was a fiction, a persona created to hide Catherine Connolly. Mia spent the rest of the night reading the letters. They were filled with the everyday chatter of two best friends, but they also held clues. Deb wrote about missing Katie, about how unfair it was what happened, about how she hoped Katie was safe. One letter dated a year after the summer of the accident was particularly revealing. "Katie, I still can't believe they made you change your name. It's like they erased you. I know you had to take the money for your mom and dad's sake, but to make you sign away your whole life, it's monstrous. Don't ever lose that locket. Okay, it's the one thing that proves it was all real, that you and Addie were real. Monstrous. That was the word Deb had used. It echoed the terror Maya had seen in her mother's eyes. This wasn't a generous settlement. This was a forced disappearance. Maya now had a name, Catherine Connolly, and a location and a key witness. A woman named Deborah Alley in Chicago. The ghost of her mother's past was starting to take shape. She looked from the letters to the locket, then to the photograph of the grand house on the lake. She now had a destination and a purpose. She was no longer just digging for the truth. She was excavating a buried life. And she had a feeling the Beaumont family had left more than one skeleton behind. The archives of the Beaumont family were not stored on a cloud server or a modern hard drive. They were housed in a climate-controlled vault in the Sub-Bontreaux, a sprawling Gothic mansion that Adrian now rarely visited. It took Finch 2 days to get the access codes and another full day to locate the relevant files buried deep within rows of gray anonymous filing cabinets. When Finch finally presented the file to Adrian, it felt heavier than its meager half-inch thickness would suggest. The label typed on an old-fashioned typewriter read, Estate Incident August 911. Internal resolution. Adrian opened it. The cold legalistic language of the documents was a stark contrast to the chaotic, sun-drenched memories of that summer. He was the minor. The incident was an unfortunate mechanical failure, and the resolution was a private settlement. And there it was, a non-disclosure agreement of terrifying scope and permanence, signed by three people: Michael Connolly, Maria Connolly, and their daughter Catherine Connolly. The settlement amount was substantial for the time, $250,000. In exchange, the Connolly family agreed to relinquish their employment, vacate the estate property immediately, and never again make contact with any member of the Beaumont family. They agreed to never speak of the incident or their relationship with the Beaumonts to anyone under penalty of severe legal and financial repercussions. It was a gag order for life. The signature at the bottom authorizing the payment was his father's Walter Beaumont, crisp, arrogant, and final. As Adrian read, the stark, unforgiving print, the black and white text dissolved, and the colors of that summer bled through vivid and painful. Summer 1991. He was 10 years old, a solitary boy named Addie, lost in the cavernous halls of the Lake Andorrero estate. His father was a phantom, always in his study or on the phone. His mother was a fragile, medicated presence who floated through the days in a silk dressing gown. Adrian's life was one of tutors and timetables, a gilded cage. Then came Katie. Catherine Connolly, or Katie, was the daughter of the head groundskeeper. She was a year older than him, a wild thing with hair the color of a sunset, knees permanently scuffed, and a laugh that could startle birds from the trees. She knew the woods behind the estate like the back of her hand. She taught him how to skip stones so they'd bounce 7 times, how to find the best wild raspberries, and how to carve little figures out of soft pine wood with her father's pocket knife. She was the only person who didn't care that he was a Beaumont. To her, he was just Addie. She treated him not with the difference of the other staff, but with the boisterous, challenging affection of a true friend. For the first time in his life, Adrian didn't feel like an heir. He just felt like a boy. His most treasured possession from that summer was a small, crudely carved wooden bird she had made for him. He had kept it for years, hidden away like a secret, until his father had found it and dismissed it as sentimental clutter during one of their moves. The day of the accident was bright and hot. They had borrowed one of the smaller motorboats, something they were strictly forbidden from doing. It was Katie's idea, of course. She was always the brave one. They were out in the middle of the lake, the sun beating down, their laughter echoing across the water. Adrian was at the stern trying to fix a fishing line when it happened. A sputtering cough from the outboard motor, a plume of black smoke, and then a deafening bang. He remembered a wave of intense heat and the sight of a gleaming piece of metal, a shard from the engine casing spinning through the air directly at his face. He was frozen a fly in amber, but Katie wasn't. She moved with an impossible speed, launching herself at him, shoving him sideways. Her body slammed into his, sending them both tumbling towards the edge of the boat. The piece of shrapnel missed his head by inches, slicing across the back of his hand, instead carving a star-shaped gash into his skin. He remembered the shock of the pain, the sight of his own blood, and Katie's scream as another smaller piece caught her upper arm. Then they were in the water. The boat was on fire, and the world was chaos. He remembered her holding on to him, even though she was hurt, treading water and yelling for help until the estate staff reached them in another boat. The aftermath was a blur of doctors' bandages and his father's cold, furious face. He was confined to his room, and when he asked for Katie, he was told she was fine, but that he was not to see her. A week later, his father sat him down in his study. "The Connollys are gone, Adrian," Walter had said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "The accident was their fault. Negligence. They were lucky I didn't have them charged. I gave them a generous sum of money to relocate and start over. It's for the best. We don't associate with people like that. It was a lesson in choosing your friends more carefully." Adrian, 10 years old and terrified of his father, had accepted it. He'd buried the memory of Katie under layers of duty ambition, and the relentless pressure to become the man his father demanded. He allowed himself to believe the lie because it was easier. He let a small bitter seed of resentment grow the idea that Katie and her family had simply taken the money and run that their friendship had a price tag. Now sitting in his sterile office 34 years later, holding the document that was her life sentence, he felt the full crushing weight of his father's cruelty. This wasn't a settlement, it was an exile. They hadn't just paid her off. They had threatened a working-class family with legal ruin and forced them into silence. They had erased a brave, laughing girl named Katie Connolly and replaced her with a ghost named Catherine Peterson. And he, Adrian Beaumont, had let it happen. He had believed the lie because it was convenient, and he had spent more than 3 decades building an empire on a foundation that was rotten with deceit. He looked at his scar. It was no longer a symbol of a childhood accident. It was a brand, a permanent reminder of his own ignorance and the profound debt he owed to a girl he had left behind. He buzzed his intercom. "Finch," he said, his voice tight and raw. "Get the jet ready. I'm going to Chicago. Find an address for a Deborah Ali and run a search for any and all specialists in corticobasal degeneration. The best in the world. I don't care what it costs." He was no longer investigating a potential grifter. He was beginning a rescue mission 34 years too late. While Adrian was flying to Chicago on his private jet, Maya was taking a bus. The 13-hour ride was a grueling, sleepless journey fueled by stale coffee and a burning sense of purpose. She had used a portion of Adriana's hush money to fund the trip, an irony that was not lost on her. She'd found a possible address for Deborah O'Malley through an online people finder service. A long shot, but the only one she had. She found the address in a quiet tree-lined suburb. The house was a modest but well-kept bungalow with a garden full of blooming roses. Maya's heart hammered as she walked up the path and rang the doorbell. The woman who answered was in her late 50s with kind eyes and the same warm smile Maya had seen in the old photograph. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Are you Deborah Ali?" Maya asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I am." Maya took a deep breath. "My name is Maya Peterson. I think you were friends with my mother a long time ago. Her name was Catherine Connolly." Deborah's friendly expression dissolved, replaced by the same look of shock Maya had seen on Adrian Beaumont's face. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Katie," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "Oh my God, Katie Connolly. I haven't heard that name in 30 years. Is she all right?" Over the next 2 hours, sitting in Deborah's cozy living room with a cup of tea, she couldn't drink. Maya learned the full story from an outsider's perspective. Deb and Catherine had been best friends since kindergarten. She described the Catherine she knew vibrant, fearless, and fiercely loyal. She talked about the summer at the Beaumont estate, about how excited Catherine had been to have a real friend in the lonely rich boy Addie. "She adored that boy," Deb said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "It wasn't a crush, not really. It was deeper. They were 2 lonely kids who found each other. She used to carve him little things, animals and such. There was this one, a little bird that he loved." Maya's mind flashed. A bird? Her mother had sometimes mumbled about a bird. Deb's tone turned bitter as she recounted the aftermath of the accident. "It was a nightmare, Maya. Her parents were terrified. Walter Beaumont. That man was a monster. He came to their little cottage on the estate with 2 lawyers. He accused Mr. Connolly of negligence, of failing to maintain the boat, threatened to sue them into oblivion, have him blacklisted from ever working again. They were simple working people. They had nothing, so they offered the money." Maya finished the pieces clicking into place. "It wasn't an offer." Deb corrected, her voice sharp. "It was a command. Take this money, change your names and disappear or I will ruin you." They made Katie sign it too. She was only 21. They made her sign away her own name. She called me from a payphone a week later, sobbing. Said she was Catherine Peterson, now that she could never see or speak to me again. Now that was the last time I ever heard from her. The sheer calculated cruelty of it left Maya breathless. They hadn't just silenced her mother. They had dismantled her entire life, piece by piece. "There's one more thing," Maya said, her voice low. She pulled the shoebox from her tote bag. "My mother kept this. I think she wanted to throw it away, but she couldn't. She sifted through the contents, her fingers finally closing around a small hard object wrapped in a piece of yellowed cloth at the very bottom. She hadn't noticed it before, hidden so deep. She unwrapped it. It was a small wooden bird, no bigger than her thumb. It was crudely carved, the knife mark still visible, but there was a definite charm to it. The wood was worn smooth from years of being held. Deb gasped. "That's it! That's the bird she carved for Addie. He must have given it back to her for safekeeping before they went out on the boat that day." "Oh, Katie, to think she kept it all these years." Maya held the bird in her palm. It felt like the weight of the entire past had settled in her hand. This little piece of wood wasn't just a trinket. It was the one object that tied her mother and Adrienne Beaumont together. It was irrefutable proof of their friendship, a relic from a time before the lawyers and the lies. It was a truth you could hold. She now knew what she had to do. Confronting Adrienne Beaumont with just a story was one thing. He could dismiss it, deny it, pay his way out of it. But he couldn't deny this. As Mir was making this discovery, Adrienne was sitting in a sterile Chicago law office. Finch had tracked down the Connolly family's lawyer from 1991, now a stooped elderly man named Peterson. A chilling coincidence. After some persuasion involving a significant donation to his retirement fund, the old lawyer had confirmed everything. He even remembered the girl Catherine. "Frightened kid," he'd mumbled. Her parents were even more scared. The Beaumont lawyer he played rough left them with no choice. The confirmation settled like a block of ice in Adrienne's stomach. There was no ambiguity left, no room for doubt. It was all true. His father had orchestrated the entire cover-up with brutal efficiency. Finch entered the room, his face grim. "Sir, I've located Catherine Peterson. She's living in a low-income apartment building back in the city. And sir, her medical records are extensive. It's not good." Adrienne stood up, his fist clenched. "Book the flight back now." Maya arrived back home the next morning exhausted but resolute. The wooden bird was safely in her pocket. As she walked up to her apartment building, a sleek black town car with tinted windows was parked at the curb. A man in a dark suit. Robert Finch stood waiting by the entrance. "Ms. Peterson," he asked, his voice polite but firm. Maya stopped her guard immediately up. "Who are you?" "My name is Robert Finch. I work for Mr. Beaumont," he said. "He would like to see you." He asked if you would be willing to meet him at his office. The moment had come. Maya clutched the wooden bird in her pocket. "Tell him I'll be there in 1 hour," she said, her voice clear and steady. "But the meeting will be on my terms." She wasn't going into the lion's den as a waitress asking for a handout. She was going in as Catherine Connie's daughter, and she was bringing 34 years of silence with her. The Beaumont Industries headquarters was a skyscraper of steel and glass that stabbed at the sky, a monument to ruthless ambition. Maya felt impossibly small as she walked through the cavernous marble lobby, her sensible shoes clicking softly on the polished floor. Finch met her and escorted her to a private elevator that ascended in unnerving silence. Adrienne Beaumont's office was less an office and more a kingdom. The view was panoramic. The furniture was minimalist and brutally expensive, and the man himself stood by the window, his back to her, looking down on the city he owned. "Miss Peterson," he said, turning around. His face was etched with a tension that hadn't been there in the diner. The cold mask was gone, replaced by something more complex, weariness, regret, and a flicker of apprehension. "Thank you for coming." "I'm not here for you," Maya said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast room. "I'm here for my mother." "I know," he said quietly. "I've been looking into what happened at Lake Ontario." Looking into it, Maya's voice dripped with incredulity. "You were there. You lived it." "Or did you forget I didn't forget?" Adrienne said, his voice raw. "I was told a lie. I was 10 years old and I believed my father when he said your mother and her family had been taken care of, that they had left willingly. They were exiled, Maya shot back, taking a step forward. "Your father threatened them. He terrified them into signing away their own names, their own lives. My mother became a ghost so that the great Beaumont family wouldn't have to deal with an inconvenience." Adrienne flinched as if she had struck him. Every word was the truth, and he had no defense. "I know that now, and I am sorry. That word is inadequate. I know it is. But I am sorry doesn't pay for my mother's medication, Maya said, her anger finally boiling over. It doesn't give her back the 34 years she spent looking over her shoulder, terrified that one of your father's lawyers would show up and punish her for simply existing. It doesn't heal her. She saw a flicker of the old powerful Beaumont in his eyes, a defensiveness that rose instinctively. He was a man accustomed to solutions to transactions. He was about to speak, perhaps to offer money to lay out a plan, but Maya didn't give him the chance. She reached into her pocket. My mother's memories are fading. She gets confused. But there are things, moments that her heart remembers even when her mind can't. She used to talk about a boy named Addie, and she used to talk about a bird. She opened her hand. Resting in her palm was the small, worn wooden bird. Adrian stared at it. All the air seemed to leave the room. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, his eyes locked on the tiny carving. The multi-billion-dollar corporation, the city spread out below the weight of his empire. It all vanished. He was 10 years old again, sitting on a sun-drenched dock with a girl with auburn hair, watching her small, nimble fingers carve a piece of scrap pine into a treasure. I thought I'd lost it, he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. It was more than just memory. It was grief. Grief for the boy he had been and for the friend he had lost. He reached out a trembling hand, not to take the bird, but just to hover his fingers over it as if it might disappear. The wooden bird had shattered his final defense. It was a tangible piece of their shared past, a testament to a friendship his father had tried to obliterate. It was proof that before the money and the lawyers, there was just Addie and Katie. I want you to see her, Maya said, her voice softening slightly. The sight of his raw vulnerability had chipped away at her anger, leaving a core of profound sadness. Adrian finally looked up from the bird, his gray eyes shining with unshed tears. He nodded, unable to speak. The visit to the apartment was surreal. The titan of industry, Adrian Beaumont, looked entirely out of place in the small, cluttered living room that smelled of lavender, air freshener, and illness. Catherine was in her armchair, dozing. Maya gently woke her. "Mama, there's someone here to see you." Catherine's eyes fluttered open. They settled on Adrian, who stood awkwardly in the doorway. There was no recognition at first, just the vague confusion she often had with strangers. Adrian slowly walked over and knelt before her chair, much as Maya had done. He was now at eye level with the frail woman who had once saved his life. "Hello, Katie," he said softly, using the name he hadn't spoken in over 3 decades. Catherine's eyes widened. The name spoken in that deep voice seemed to bypass the damaged pathways of her brain and strike a deep, resonant chord within her soul. Her gaze flickered down to his hand, which rested on the arm of her chair. She saw the pale, star-shaped scar. Her own hand, gnarled and weak, lifted and shakily traced the outline of the scar. "The stars," she whispered, her voice, a fragile rustle of leaves. "I made the stars go away." Tears streamed down Adrian's face. He didn't try to wipe them away. "Yes, you did," he choked out. "You saved me, Katie." For a moment, the fog of her illness cleared completely. She was no longer Catherine Peterson, the invalid. She was Katie Connolly, the brave girl from the lake. And he was not Adrian Beaumont, the billionaire. He was Addie, her friend. "Your father," she said, her voice suddenly clear and lucid, filled with a distant, remembered fear. "He was a hard man. He said we had to go for your own good. He said you would be better off without us. A clean break." She looked at Adrian, her eyes pleading. "I didn't want to leave you, Addie. I never wanted to leave." This was the final brutal truth. His father had not only exiled her, he had poisoned the memory of their friendship, telling each of them that the other was better off without them. It was a calculated act of emotional vandalism. Adrian had been made to believe she'd abandoned him for money. She had been made to believe she was a danger to his future. It was a lie designed to keep them apart forever. "He was wrong," Adrian said, taking her frail hand in his. "He was wrong about everything." He looked up at Maya, who was watching them, tears silently tracking down her own cheeks. In that moment, the debt was clear. It wasn't about money. It was about time, about a life stolen, about a truth that had finally, painfully been brought into the light. The reunion was not an ending, but a reckoning. It was the moment the past finally caught up with the present, demanding to be heard. The days that followed were a whirlwind of decisive action. Immediately, Adrienne moved Catherine to the finest neurological clinic in the country, ensuring she was attended by the world's leading specialists. While her condition was incurable, the new level of care brought her a comfort and peace she hadn't known in years. But his atonement went beyond money. Adrienne became a constant presence, visiting Catherine daily. In her lucid moments, they spoke of that long-lost summer, piecing together the fragments of their friendship in a quiet healing ritual. Confronting his elderly, unrepentant father only strengthened Adrienne's resolve. He announced the sale of the Lake Ontario estate, the very symbol of their family's cruelty, to fund the Catherine Connolly Foundation, a new organization dedicated to fighting the kind of corporate injustice she had suffered. The place where her life was dismantled would now serve to rebuild the lives of others. He approached Mir not with charity, but with what he called overdue restitution. He established a trust that would secure her future and paid for her to return to college. Maya chose to study social work, determined to use her experience to help others. One day, her old boss at the diner found his debts mysteriously paid off. The bond between Maya and Adrienne solidified into a deep, familial friendship. He carved a new wooden bird for Catherine One, with its wings outstretched in flight. Seeing her hold the old hidden bird in one hand and the new hopeful one in the other was the truest sign of their new beginning. The past could never be erased, but its wounds could finally be exposed to the daylight, and a debt buried in fear was finally being repaid with dignity and grace. The story of Maya, Adrienne, and Catherine is a powerful reminder that the past is never truly buried. It lives on in scars, in memories, and in the quiet courage of those who refuse to be forgotten. It shows us that a single moment of bravery can echo for a lifetime, and that true atonement is about more than just apologies. It's about action, restitution, and the difficult work of making things right. Their journey from a greasy spoon diner to a place of healing and justice proves that beneath the surface of our ordinary lives, extraordinary stories of secrets, survival, and redemption are waiting to be told. If this story of a hidden past and a daughter's relentless quest for truth moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share it with someone who loves a story of unexpected twists and profound human connection. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you won't miss our next deep dive into a story that feels stranger than fiction. What secrets do you think are hidden in plain sight all around us? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening.